All right, two presidents. George Herbert Walker Bush, if you want to put his full name, George H.W. Bush, as opposed to George W. Bush. If you have a computer and you want to put this back where it should really fit, this would go before the War on Terror. That comes along after Clinton. So this is really right after Reagan. We'd get Bush and Clinton, and then the War on Terror. All right, for George H.W. Bush, he's president from 89 to 93, wins the election in 88, takes office in 89, goes through 93. I just have 4 points. We'll talk about the election of 88 very quickly, and then the savings and loan crisis, then the Americans with Disabilities Act, and the Gulf War. Those 4 things. From him. First of all, the election. Mostly I just want to mention a promise that Bush made in the election that came back to bite him because he didn't keep the promise. Right? During the campaign, he promised, or this was his phrase, "Read my lips, no new taxes." And since I told you he didn't keep the promise, he signed a bill raising taxes. All right, the excuse was the deficit and other things. The Democrats in Congress, they were all too willing to send him the tax increase. And once he signed it, he owned it. I mean, really, the Democrats in Congress, they were the ones that put the piece of legislation together and sent it to him. But he's the one that made the promise, no new taxes, and he backed out on that. That really did a lot to undermine his credibility and lose favor with lots of people. So the election of 8, he makes that promise in the election and then afterwards raises taxes. So, all right, the second thing here is the savings and loan crisis, S&L crisis. You might have heard it. I mean, there's still savings and loans around today. All right, let me give you here a brief description of what these things are, and then they get themselves in trouble. Savings and loans, or savings and loan institution, it's really just what it sounds like. It's a place where people save money, and then that institution uses that money primarily to loan out for people for mortgages. So you put your extra cash into the bank, you get some small amount of interest, and then that institution turns around and loans that money out to other people. Savings and loan. All right, there were significant restrictions placed upon them by the federal government and by state governments. They were, they can only charge or give a very small interest rate on the money that was saved and other things like that. But that's the basic idea: savings and loans. So a lot of these institutions, even predating Bush, but culminated under Bush, had gotten themselves into really bad trouble by giving out very bad loans. People borrow money and defaulted on the loan, and then weren't paying it back, and then the institutions were running out of cash because other people had put their money in savings were also coming and withdrawing savings, and they weren't getting money coming in. So a lot of these institutions got into serious trouble. By 89, over 1,000 of them had gone bankrupt. All right, now these were these were covered with insurance. It's not the FDIC insurance. It's what's the name of it? I've got it here someplace. Like Savings and Loans Insurance Corporation. Yeah, there it is. Federal Savings and Loan Insurance Corporation. So not FDIC, FSLIC or something like that. But the same idea as FDIC insurance that we have at a bank. These things were covered. So we had these savings and loans going out of business, and then this insurance being tapped into over and over and over again as they went out of business, and then the people who had deposited money there getting their money back. So we had a drain on the federal treasury to pay these things back, as well as on states. Some of these depend on the rules and where they had how they'd set it up. Sometimes the insurance came through the states. So we had a drain on state funds as well as federal funds here. Anyway, over 1,000 of them go bankrupt by 89. Eventually the total cost, to me this is a little astounding, was about $3,000 per taxpayer. That's some significant cash, even for the Obamas. All right, so this becomes a major financial thing here. culminating in the Bush presidency. We're actually going to reference this with Bill Clinton. Him and his wife were involved with the savings and loan and some investments where money gets funneled from the savings and loan into this investment, and then the savings and loans goes bankrupt. And so there's a scandal there out of that. But so, all right, so that in itself was enough. We had this crisis and a serious financial expense. On top of that, with the savings and loan crisis, is that there were major scandals all over the place of people involved with corruption and fraud in these things. Either members of Congress getting bribes from these institutions for the government to continue propping them up and keeping some of these things alive, to people working in these institutions sucking money off to the side, and it's just major fraud and corruption. There ends up being about 1,100 prosecutions out of the savings and loan crisis, and 839 convictions, people convicted of crimes out of this. So there's a lot of fraud and corruption. There's one name, at least to mention to you, a guy named Charles Keating. He was the most notorious of the people. He was using money from savings and loan institutions to bribe members of Congress for them to kick back favors and things to him.
What was his last name?
Keating, Keating. There were him, and I think it was 5 senators. They were referred to as the Keating Five. But there are other people like that. He's just the most notorious or famous. All right, so we had, just them going bankrupt would have been enough. Then we had layered on top of that the fraud and crime, even at times involving people in government. So savings and loan crisis. Again, Bush really wasn't responsible for that, but he was the president for that thing. All right, the next thing for Bush is the Americans with Disabilities Act. What this did was kind of what it sounds like. I know it's unusual to have laws that do what they sound like. The Affordable Care Act, it makes care unaffordable. But this dealt with people with disabilities. It did 2 basic things. It prohibited job discrimination based upon disability, and it made businesses accommodate people with disabilities. At Purdue, in their classes, the first class period, I forget the statement, but the teacher always read a statement, and it was because of this, inform me if you have any disabilities, if you need special accommodations, and it's because of this Americans with Disabilities Act. All right, so it did stuff like that. So this comes up, becomes law under Bush. Bush initially opposed this thing. Is it because he's this evil ogre that likes to see handicapped people suffer? That was the way it was described.
It's not the government's job.
Yeah, it's not the government's job, especially not the federal government's job. Right? This really amounted to a massive intrusion of the federal government into everybody's life. Handicapped parking spaces, handicapped ramps, the doorknobs like that now are a violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act. As you update, you have to put the lever-handled ones because they're easier for somebody to open. Just this massive intrusion into everybody's private life. And he was against it for that reason. He really didn't, he wasn't in his bedroom at night saying, yes, I kicked another handicapped kid down the steps today. It was great. It wasn't that. He's saying this is the federal government, this is none of their business. This is a massive intrusion. We're going to see several things like that come up here with Clinton too. Just these massive intrusions. It's the same thinking here that's used to justify a push for federal legislation requiring accommodation of queers and transgenders and all of that. It's not, that legislation hasn't come there, but it's the same thinking. It'll be the federal government imposing that on us everywhere. So massive invasion of the federal government into private life. So again, if a state wanted to do it, completely different situation. If a city wanted to do it, you can. If a businessman wanted to be nice and charitable on his own, that would be fine. Right? If a businessman said, I don't care about handicapped people, they don't have much money, and he doesn't accommodate them, then everyone else in the community also could say, you know what, I don't like that businessman, and go someplace else. The free market can really handle a lot of this stuff. But for the federal government just to come with this blanket law Bush was correct, a massive expansion of the government. So, okay, Americans with Disabilities Act. Question on that? It's ingrained into us. It's, you know, I don't know, maybe you don't pay attention to it like I do, but all frequently it's the ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, you know, requirements all over the place. Maybe some of you enrolled in college under the Americans with Disabilities Act. You have to let me in, even though I'm stupid. So, I'm kidding. So, all right, last thing for Bush is the Gulf War. Persian Gulf War. Down here. This is a map from another time frame, but down that part of the world is what we're talking about. In 1990, August the 2nd, 1990, if you want it, Iraq invaded Kuwait, the little country to the south of Iraq. That crazy dictator that lost his head. Mm-hmm. He was eventually hung after the invasion of Iraq. The Iraqi people hung him, and they got the rope a little bit too long, so he literally lost his head. Okay, so it's August the 2nd, 1990, that Saddam Hussein, the dictator of Iraq, invades Kuwait. Was not much of a fight. They completely overwhelmed the Kuwaiti defenses, occupy the country. Right. Yeah. August 2nd, 1990. I was getting ready to start my senior year of high school. That's not because that was so long ago. It's just to impress upon you how recent this was. All right. So the fall of that year, Bush pulls together a coalition of countries, obviously to oppose this. They eventually lay out a demand that Saddam Hussein completely withdraw from Iraq, or else, you know, kind of what we didn't do what we did to Japan, but the same kind of thing. It's time to leave. So the deadline for that was January the 15th, 1991. And so August they invade, January 15th, that was the deadline, get out. They did not, obviously. So the first thing that happened was a 5-week bombing campaign where we just bombed all over Iraq. And I remember in high school hearing about these smart bombs and how they could shoot them through windows. And, you know, this is cutting edge technology at this point. Now we do that with smartphones and drones and stuff. But you know, there really was there'd been a massive improvement in the technology available and the navigation system on these rockets and things. But anyway, we a 5-week bombing campaign, and then following that was an invasion of Iraq that lasted for 100 hours. I'm sorry, mainly an invasion of Kuwait to drive them out, but it also swung through into parts of southern Iraq. This invasion took 100 hours. Saddam Hussein had been talking about the mother of all wars. You know, you guys better not come. This, you know, like Armageddon, all over, you know, just the mother of all wars, worse than World War II. You know, our own military they had hundreds of thousands of body bags and things like this. We really were expecting a little bit more, but it ends up being not a fight. Yeah.
The reason they were expecting so much was because the Iraqis used Soviet tanks. And according to the information the Russians had given them, the Soviet tanks were superior in every manner to the American tanks. When in reality, they were held together with hand welding and they're still basically the same tanks from World War II.
Yeah, and we were using, I think it was the Abrams at that point, but I mean, that could go at about 50, 60 miles an hour and still accurately target these tanks.
And uranium rounds and our reactive armor, and they were still using steel plating.
Yeah, it wasn't a fight.
There's actually one time where a group of armored personnel carriers destroyed an entire tank division.
No, it was ugly, very ugly. Even the what was his special forces? I can't remember. There was a certain unit, Republican Guard. They said, "Oh yeah, they're gonna take them out." It was just there were guys that came to college with me actually that fought there, and they were talking about. You know, they would come up on the Iraqis and they would throw their guns down and they were waving their hands. You know, I want to surrender. I saw what happened over there. I don't want that. Sometimes so many were surrendering that it bottlenecked everything up because we're going to handle all these prisoners all of a sudden. But anyway, 100-hour war was not much war. There were casualties and things like that. There were a lot of casualties on their side, but there was some on our side. There was a guy that came to war that was on a tank, and they got lost in the desert. You know, they're zooming through, and all of a sudden they lost all the units, and they're wandering around trying to find somebody. I think they found a different unit and just joined them. But this is a little bit of generalization, but he was a Marine. You know, if you think a little more enthusiasm than thinking. Anyway, 100-hour war. We drive the Iraqis out of Kuwait, occupy the southern parts of Iraq, and that really ends it. We free Kuwait. Once that's established, you pull out of Iraq. We leave Saddam Hussein there. There were some people that really said we should have just taken care of this problem at that point. When it resurfaces again under the next Bush, there was, you know, if your dad had been a little more aggressive, this would not be there. But anyway, that was the goal for 1991. Yeah.
Just like last week, his Pastor Royalty did what Margaret Thatcher told George Bush one day under the stand-up. She said, "Now's not the time to be wobbly."
Yes. Yeah. So, okay. Goal 4. See, the problem with talking about history that you've lived through is there's so many little details that really in the end aren't that significant, but they're fun to talk about, and I'm thinking about those right now. So, yes.
One of those insignificant little details, actually, the Abrams, that weapon the Abrams used was so powerful they were able to shoot through the sand dunes and hit tanks on the side and go through and through the tanks on the side.
Yeah. It was not a good day for the Iraqis.
They had the third largest army in the world, and they were decimated
It
by
was-
tank division.
Yeah. There was a certain road going back to Baghdad that was just littered with, it was impassable because of all the tank carcasses and stuff along the road. So, okay. We won. There we go. And then we lost. Bill Clinton. All right, William Jefferson Clinton. Before everybody got here, basically we're going to see here a murderous, criminal, womanizing pig, and we're just going to fill in some details. All right, so that's the guy literally should be in jail for rape, or at the very least sexual harassment, groping, things of that nature, at the very least. But we'll get there. All right, I got this split up into 3 pieces. The first part is legislation. There's a wave of bills and things that come through Congress. We'll talk about those, and then we'll talk about the scandals and the impeachment. And it's still referenced today. That, you know, well, just on the news this morning, I heard someone referencing about some things that happened in these hearings. And then the last thing, if we have time, a list of just some other things that happened during his presidency. Some of them he was responsible for, others not necessarily responsible for. So, all right, legislation. The first thing here actually isn't legislation, but rather than make a separate point for it, I threw it here. So, his policy for gays in the military. Don't ask, don't tell. That was his policy. Nobody was supposed to ask, and they weren't supposed to let anybody know if they were gay. Not to be too gross, but I mean, there's a reason why guys and girls aren't in the same barracks. There's a major problem when you put queers and a bunch of guys together in the same barracks. I mean, there's all kinds of sickness and craziness. And really, any policy for the military, the primary job of the military is to effectively and efficiently kill other people. Okay. And that should be what all this is filtered through. Does letting gays in the military help them become more deadly? And the answer is no. I mean, imagine the tension in an army unit where everybody knows there's one queer in the room. And, you know, think of the open showers and the common bathrooms. You know, just insane to pretend like, oh no, this is no big deal. We'll just like gays in the military. But anyway, that was his policy. Don't ask, don't tell. Before that, it was, you know, if you came out that you were gay, you were out, which I think is the same policy for lots of things. But anyway, that was his approach. Don't ask, don't tell. All right, the next thing is the Family and Medical Leave Act. This is a piece of legislation that comes through Congress. Family and Medical Leave Act. What this did was it required employers to give up to 12 weeks of unpaid leave for when a child is born or if a family member is seriously ill. Isn't it sad that the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy would be an improvement? And now we have military chaplains that are doing gay marriages. All right, so 12 weeks of unpaid leave for maternity leave after a child is born or for a serious family member, right? Good, bad, indifferent. It's a nice idea. I mean, but
It's not their job.
again, it's no business of the federal government, right? If a state wanted to do this, that's one thing. City wanted to do it. If a private businessman said, you know what, I'm going to be very generous. I'm going to let people off. But if a private businessman also wanted to say, if you get pregnant and have a child, I'm going to fire you because it disrupts the operations of the business. It's a private business, okay? We could all say, oh, that's kind of harsh and nasty, but it's a private business, all right? So anyway, it's no job of the federal government, nowhere. This is another one of another example of that intrusion of the federal government into the lives, everyday lives of ordinary people. So, all right, so the Family Medical Leave Act. The next one is the Brady Bill. Not the Brady Bunch, that was a sitcom. The Brady Bill. This is a gun thing. Anybody know who the Brady is that it's referenced? I think we talked about it before, at least mentioned it.
He was on one of Reagan's security deal. He was shot in the head.
Yeah, he was shot in the head in the assassination attempt on Reagan. So what this thing did was it required a background check and a 5-day waiting period to buy a gun. We've gotten rid of the 5-day waiting period. Now we have this instant background check. But background check, 5-day waiting period to buy a gun. I remember everyone talking about, well, this is to prevent crimes of passion, where a wife gets angry at her husband, she goes out and buys a gun and comes back and kills him. This gives her 5 days to think about it. Come on.
So is his wife the one that came up with the Brady campaign?
Against guns? Oh, he survived.
No. I know there's like a liberal in California that made up the thing. It's called the Brady campaign. Basically, trying to do everything within her power, or her organization's power, to stop guns being.
Probably is, I would guess. If they're using that term, it would be, yeah, I would guess.
I think it's Sarah Brady.
That sounds right, actually. So it wouldn't surprise me if it was. But I don't know for sure. All right, so the Brady Bill comes up while he's in office. He signs it. The next one, National Voter Registration Act. That one sounds good. What this did is it required states to allow voters to register when they renew or apply for a license. So you go get your license. They have to have some system for you to register to vote at that point. It was nicknamed Motor Voter. Okay, I mean, is that necessarily a bad idea? Okay, but what problem do we see here with this, I hope? The same problem we've seen a couple times. Yes, it's no job of the federal government. I mean, this is, if a state wanted to, fine. But to have the federal government just dictate this, it really is, it's none of their business. And constitutionally, not within their authority. So, Motor Voter, National Voter Registration Act. Next one is Nafta. North American Free Trade Act. This set up free trade between the U.S. and Mexico. Not quite free immigration, that's what we have today. Free trade between the U.S. and Mexico. And this actually wasn't really bad. I mean, free trade, if it really is free trade, is always good. If we have one side cheating and calling it free trade, if you are, like you did with your little siblings, you have two bright, shiny pennies, and they've got just one cord, and you say, look, I'm going to give you 2 nice pieces of money for only 1, and you make this trade, all right? You could say, well, it's a free trade. She voluntarily gave it. No, but we have one side cheating. That's really not free trade. So as long as it really is free trade, that's fine. That's another valid point that Donald Trump makes. He says, I'm going to make sure the other side's not cheating. We call it free trade and let the other side cheat. That's cheating. So anyway, this was really free trade. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. It's actually good. All right, NAFTA. The next thing is the health care crisis, or the Hillary care. It doesn't pass, but it comes up. Bill Clinton brought up this idea of a healthcare crisis. And you didn't realize how long we've had this healthcare crisis. There's just absolutely no medical coverage in the entire country for over 20 years. Wow. Where have I gotten stitches? But anyway, he brought up this healthcare crisis. After he gets elected, he puts his wife in charge of the group of people that were developing the law, and they worked very much behind closed doors, very violation of lots of federal laws about the openness of the government and no secrecy and that type of thing. But it violates all kinds of laws like that. Eventually comes up with over a 1,300 page plan that gets rejected by everybody. The Democratic-controlled Congress refused to even bring it up for a vote. Gets rejected by everybody. It did things like this. It directed doctors into certain specialties. If you showed a propensity in one thing, the government was going to force you into a certain a certain specialty. It controlled which doctors people could go see. It punished doctors and patients who paid directly for medical care. You go to the doctor and you want to pay for it in cash, that would have been a crime under her law. Well, obviously, you can't see why. You're right. Why? Well, the answer was they wanted complete control of the system. They want everything to go through the insurance company and the government be able to control the whole system. And if you're paying cash for it directly, it removes their control. At the heart of it, that's why. So, yeah, you're right. So anyway, also included an employer mandate where employees had to provide health insurance for their employees. That is part of Obamacare. That employee mandate. But anyway, at this point, once people started realizing what this thing was, everybody ran to the hill. I mean, nobody wanted to touch it. I mean, like I said, the Democrats controlled Congress. It didn't even come up for a vote. Right? They didn't want to touch it. So Hillary care goes down in flames. Okay, at that point in my list of legislation, I have a little asterisk because an event happens that causes a shift in the pattern of this legislation. So if you want to put an asterisk or something there to insert this event, then we'll continue the list, however you want to do it. 1994, the Republicans take over both houses of Congress. Been over 40 years since they'd had control of both houses. Republicans take over both houses of Congress. The end. We'll talk about a couple of things here underneath this, but the end result is now Clinton had to moderate. He had a Republican-controlled Congress, so he had to. He was forced to accept some things he wouldn't have accepted otherwise. So let me give you here first of all a list. Not first of all, really the only thing. A list of things that caused the Republicans here to all of a sudden take over Congress. It had been 40 years since that had happened. So a couple of things were happening that brought this about. First of all was the rise of talk radio. All right, it was the late 80s when we began to see Rush Limbaugh and others come on the scene. Most of that had to do with some of the stupid rules that the radio stations were forced to live under were done away with. The Democrats have thought about bringing up, what is the term for it? Oh, I can't think of it. But basically the rule was if you had a Republican on for an hour, you had to also have a Democrat on for an hour. You had to balance the presentation. You couldn't just have Republicans on all day. If you listen to talk radio, it's pretty much Republicans all day, or conservatives. But prior to that, you had to have both, and it made it just financially not feasible. If you had Rush Limbaugh for 3 hours, you had to have, I don't know, Bernie Sanders or somebody for 3 hours, and nobody listens to it. The Democrats tried to put together a Democrat national talk radio program, group of stations, and it went bankrupt. I mean, just nobody wanted to listen to them. So anyway, once that law went away, it allowed radio stations to begin airing Rush Limbaugh and Michael Medved and Sean Hannity. So at this point, Rush Limbaugh, he still is the primary guy. He was the pioneer in this whole field, a national talk show, that the whole thing. He was the pioneer. But anyway, so we have that. We have Rush Limbaugh here exposing Hillary care and some of these other things. So that is a major influencing factor. In my last 2 years of high school and through the first 3 years of college, I worked for a concrete company. And we had a radio going and listened to Rush Limbaugh through this time frame. And that was, that whole entity was a new thing at that point. So, all right, so that was one. Second thing is the Christian Coalition forms at this point. So it's kind of just what it sounds like, a group of Christians led by Pat Robertson. There's enough traction there that they began to have influence. All right, third factor that comes in here is the contract with America. Newt Gingrich, anybody know that name? He's still around today. He's floated as presidential candidate, vice president, that type of thing. Newt Gingrich, N-E-W-T. I have no idea what the origins of that name.
It's an animal. It's like a small salamander.
Yeah, I mean, but I don't know. I mean, how did he? I don't know what his parents were thinking. I don't know. This is an ugly kid. Let's call him a Newt. I don't know. Newt Gingrich. He was a member of Congress, and he pulled the Republicans in Congress together and the Republican candidates together and had them sign this contract. And it listed 10 things that they were pledging to do. They said, if we win and we get control, we're going to bring these things up. They said we can't guarantee they're going to pass. So, you know, it's got to go through Congress and the Senate and the President. But we are going to bring these up in Congress, right? And it was a list of some very, very good things. I'm not going to go through the whole list. A list of some very good things. So they get this contract together, and they win enough votes here to take over the House. And actually, they bring up 9 of them. There was the one they couldn't bring up was that never actually made it to vote. It got into committees and other places, was a term limits bill. That one never not got voted on, but the other 9 all got voted on. And I forget now, I think 3 of them actually made it into legislation, made it through the Senate, and made it through the President. So I know it's a strange thing here that they actually mostly kept their word. So anyway, we had that contract with America. Democrats called it the contract on America, like a hitman. But it was really just these guys agreeing to a certain number of things. So, and then the last one is backlash here against Hillary and all of the liberal policies that were getting shoved down our throat at that point. Hillary Care was the biggest one, but just the Brady Bill, the don't ask, don't tell, you know, all of this liberalness, just a backlash against that whole thing. Again, the president was not up for election here. He does win the next election, so he manages to play things right and win the next election. So, all right, so we have that 94 election in there where the Republicans take over Congress. Peter Jennings at ABC News described this election as a temper tantrum. He literally said it was just like the voters had a temper tantrum yesterday. The kicking, the screaming, you know, that was his description of this. So, all right, because of that election, we get here a shift in the flavor of legislation that comes out. And let's continue this list here. And we got to hurry. Defensive Marriage Act comes up. Just what it sounds like. Defended traditional marriage. What it did is it said that federal benefits could only go out to partners in a real marriage. You know, if a guy worked for the government and had a wife, his wife could get insurance through the government, that type of thing. But if we had 2 guys living together, whatever arrangement they called it, a marriage or whatever, they weren't eligible for benefits. Defensive Marriage Act. This is still the law. Obama has just openly said, I'm not going to enforce it, which is a direct violation of his oath of office. That right there would be impeachable, but it hasn't. So Defensive Marriage Act, and then the other is the Welfare Reform Act of '96. It is fun to listen to Democrats claim responsibility for reforming welfare. He was brought to this kicking and screaming, kind of like Bush was dragged into the Americans with Disabilities Act. He resisted it, fought against it, but eventually signed it. So the Welfare Reform Act of '96 did a couple things like this. It said that recipients had to go back to work within 2 years. If you're on welfare, you can't just stay there indefinitely. Within 2 years, you had to get back to work someplace. Put a lifetime cap of 5 years on welfare benefits. So you can get on for 2 years, get a job, get on for 2 years, get a job, get on for a year, and then you're done. You know, so put some caps on it like that. And it really did drop the welfare rolls. It's amazing where if you tell people that we're not going to pay for you to live and survive and not expect you to work, that people say, you know what, I'm going to go get a job because I like to eat. It was amazingly effective. So the Welfare Reform Act of '96. Okay, now let's get to the ugly stuff, scandals and impeachment. All right, starting in 1994, a panel of judges appointed an independent prosecutor. And it really is just what it sounds like, a person independent of the executive branch. Lots of times they're appointed by the president. You know, they come out of the FBI and things like that. These prosecutors, the district attorneys, all of those run, you know, under the president. This guy was outside that control. So in 94, we have a group of judges appointing this independent prosecutor to look in. The initial incident was the Clintons' involvement in the Whitewater Development Company. It was a company where the Clintons made a boatload of money with a very little investment while he was the governor of Arkansas. There's some very, very shady things. So that was the initial thing that we needed to look into that. They appoint this special prosecutor. The guy's name was Kenneth Starr. That was put into this. So it was this Whitewater Development Company that money was funneled out of a savings and loan and brought over to this company, and then the Clintons make all kinds of money on it, and the savings and loans goes bankrupt. That was the tie in there. All right, so that was the initial problem that was looking into this Whitewater investment scheme. Really, I forget the numbers, but they invested a relatively small amount and walked out with hundreds of thousands of dollars. I remember the joke was that, you know, we need to get Hillary to give us advice about land investments and stuff like that because she did so well on it.
What was the name that you just gave?
Kenneth Starr, yeah. So, all right, we're going to look, the investigation expands into other things. All right, the other things, this panel of judges, they expanded. It wasn't Kenneth Starr, you know, kind of rubbing his hands together and say, all right, what else, what other dirt can I find? This panel would say, all right, you're looking into that, also look into this, also look into this. So this panel keeps expanding the job. Liberals like to talk about Starr as this kind of loose cannon that was walking around out of control, looking for anything he could find. That really wasn't the case. It was this panel of judges. Maybe they were the loose cannons, I'm kidding. He was being assigned this task. All right, let's look at the other things that come up. That was the initial thing. 1994, we have this investigation starting over the Whitewater scandal. The next event to come up is called Travelgate. Okay, and here Hillary does something that initially was legal, kind of ugly, but legal. What she did was get rid of all the employees at the White House Travel Office and bring in her own people. Again, it's nothing necessarily wrong with that. It was kind of legal. It was just a nonpartisan group. They helped arrange for flights and things like that for people at the White House. Really no big thing. But she cans all these people, brings her own people in. And because it looks so ugly, she arranged for the FBI to investigate the head of the travel office at the White House to give it this appearance of, wow, there was fraud and corruption there. That guy never did anything wrong. He's never accused of anything, never prosecuted, found completely innocent, and did nothing wrong. But here she's using the FBI to make this just kind of an ugly action, not illegal, just kind of ugly, to try to cover it up. All right, when those details start coming out, Travelgate is added into the investigation to see if she was using the FBI inappropriately. All right, the next event is the murder of Vince Foster, or maybe you can put suicide in quotation marks. Vince Foster had been an associate of Hillary Clinton back during the Whitewater time where she's making all kinds of money in this investment. He worked at the Rose Law Firm, which is the firm that Clinton worked at. So they had been associates for a while. In 1993, he was found dead in a park in the D.C. area. 93. And initially it was assumed suicide, but as the police and the park authorities started doing their investigations, there began to be some serious questions about whether it was suicide. There was evidence of the body being moved. They found carpet fibers in his clothing, like he'd been rolled up in a carpet and thrown in a trunk and then brought up there and rolled out of the carpet. So there began to be some very serious questions about this not really being a suicide and being a murder. As those things start to come out, the Vince Foster investigation is also given to Kenneth Starr. There were multiple deaths like that during the Clinton years. Plane crashes that, in the end, they really couldn't figure out why the plane crashed, but there were people on it that had fallen out of favor with the Clintons. Just even going back to when he was the governor of Arkansas, there's these You don't want to be their friends and fall out of favor because you tend to die. But anyway, that one gets added to the Ken Starr list of investigations. All right, the next thing, I just have it labeled women. All right. Here it becomes very unsavory. This is what happened. A lady named Paula Jones was suing the president for sexual harassment. Her story was, and there's evidence that this is true, that he exposed himself to her in a hotel room and groped her. I mean, this guy's a pig. So she was suing him over this type of stuff. And in the depositions and the hearings building up to it, Bill Clinton was forced to testify under oath, and he was brought to this kicking and screaming. They tried everything they could to say, oh, he's the president, you can't force him to, whatever. He was forced to testify, and he claimed that he had never been unfaithful to his wife. Which, that's one of those laugh track moments, it was insane. So he claimed he'd never been unfaithful. Very, very quickly, women start coming forward to say, wait a second. You approached me, you propositioned me. Women said, I had an affair with him for multiple years. And women started coming out of the woodwork almost. Names like this, a lady named Jennifer Flowers, she was one of the first. A lady named Sally Perdue. Juanita Broadwick accused him of rape. Monica Lewinsky credibly accused him of rape. Kathleen Willey. Multiple women start coming out and saying, no, you were unfaithful to your wife with me. All right, so now we have this ugly situation where he's very likely committed perjury, and Kenneth Starr has to find out if he had committed perjury. Lying under oath is perjury. So he had to look into all these accusations to find out if he had lied under oath. The Democrats are all the time saying, this is his private affairs. Why are we looking at his private affairs? This is personal. It doesn't matter. No, the issue was him lying under oath, and it involved these women. So we do have some. I mean, he had to prove that he had lied, and which bring the evidence he needed to be particular and personal. There was a dress that Monica Lewinsky had that was stained with DNA from him. She had kept the dress. So evidence like that starts to come out, and again, the Democrats are saying this is horrible. This is just a witch hunt into his private life. But the issue was that perjury. So anyway, during that frame, I mean, the guy's a pig. I mean, there's no way around it, just a pig. And Kenneth Starr really had to basically dig into all this stuff to prove that he was a pig because of him lying under oath. So one other thing here with the women is that the Clintons' response to all of these things, they referred to them as bimbo eruptions, was to attack the women's reputation, talk about these sluts lying about him and these women of no reputation. And a principal person on that group was Hillary Clinton. Right? She was a primary driver attacking these women. Remember that next time she talks about how she's going to fight for the women of America. She didn't fight for those women that her husband had attacked. James Carville, he's still around. He once said, it's amazing what you'll find when you drag a dollar bill through a trailer park. And that was his description of these women. They're just these sluts that would do anything for money, and they're lying. The Republicans got them in here lying. This is anyway, just attack these women. Very, very ugly attacks on these women. So women. That was the last thing here that Kenneth Starr is tasked to investigate into Clinton. All right, let's finish this thing up, please. September of 1998, by that point, Kenneth Starr had finished his investigation, brings a report to Congress. I mean, there's members of Congress who report, having read the report, which was much more detailed than what became public, getting sick and just very unsettling. September of 98, the House impeached the president. And that impeachment means they brought official accusations. It was not a condemnation yet. It was an impeachment. If you want the two charges, it was obstruction of justice, as Kenneth Starr was looking into these things. Any way that they could, the Clintons would get in the way. Obstruction of justice, and then the other was perjury, lying to a grand jury over the not being unfaithful to his wife. The trial takes place in January and February of 99 in the Senate, and he's acquitted. It requires 2/3 of the senators to find him guilty, so it's a high bar to get to, but he was found not guilty on both counts. I was driving in the car. I remember hearing it. I was not especially surprised, but it was aggravating, to say the least. So, Bill Clinton was disbarred because of these accusations. I mean, the state of Arkansas, where he was a lawyer, banned him, threw him out of being a lawyer because of the perjury. But somehow the senators thought that he was still qualified to be president. All right. One last thing here. This is still under the scandal and impeachments. This is not part of the impeachment, but all through the Clinton presidency, there was continued accusations and questions about campaign funds coming from outside the country. Foreign nationals giving money to the Democratic National Party. Highly illegal. All right, highly illegal. All right, the most famous name is a guy named John Huang, Huang, and he was funneling money in from China. There was a story of Al Gore going to a Buddhist monastery someplace in the States, a place where these people made vows of poverty, and these monks gave several $1 million to the Democrats. It came from China. Again, there ends up not ever being any prosecutions. It wasn't brought to the Kennestar to investigate, but it was just this kind of this nonstop trickle of money trickling in, or foreign nationals visiting the White House, and all of a sudden, there's a $500,000 contribution, and somehow tied to them, that type of thing. So, all right, we'll have to leave off the last few things. Timothy McVeigh, the Oklahoma City bombing, the Branch Davidian compound at Waco, Randy Weaver, and probably the most funniest, especially from your perspective, is the Y2K scare. You guys ever heard about that one? There was this big scare in '99 that when the date switched to 2000, all the computers would quit working and crash because they were all 19.9 and then dates. They weren't set up to handle a 2000 date. So it really, looking back, is kind of funny, but it was just, all years, this Y2K, the electrical grid is going to shut down, planes are going to follow the sky. So I bought a shotgun and a rifle, a rifle and a revolver. Kind of was my Y2K preparation. It's a good excuse for that. All right, you're dismissed.